was born into a promise I never made. From the moment I took my first breath, my future was decided for me. I was the girl promised in marriage before I even understood what marriage meant. My family, like many others in our small Kenyan village, believed this was a blessing. They were proud, certain that my path had been chosen well. But I remember the day when I realized what that path truly meant. I was 7 years old when they took me, without warning, to the ceremony that would forever mark my childhood. I can still feel the hands that held me down, the sharp pain, the silence that followed my screams. The women told me this was tradition, a rite of passage, something that would make me pure. But all I felt was fear, and a pain that never fully left me. The physical wound healed with time, but the trauma lived deep inside me, a scar that I carried alone. My mother called it an honor, but I called it a curse. From that day on, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never let a daughter of mine endure this. Never. As I grew older, I saw the world through a different lens. While the other girls in my village accepted their fate, I questioned it. By the time I was 15, it was clear. My future had been arranged. I was to marry a man more than twice my age, a man I had never met. My family celebrated, but I felt trapped, as if the walls around me were closing in. At night, I would lie awake and imagine a different life. I had heard whispers of other women who had escaped, who had traveled to places where they could decide their own futures. I didn't want to be just another girl in the village, a girl who lived and died by the rules others had set for her. I wanted more. But to choose that path meant one thing: I had to leave. Leaving wasn't simple. It meant abandoning everything and everyone I had ever known. My family, my home. Could I really do it? Could I walk away from the life I was born into? I struggled with these questions every day, until one night, the answer became clear. It was the night before my wedding. The night that was supposed to be the beginning of my new life as someone's wife. I remember sitting in my room, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror. My heart raced, and I knew it was now or never. If I didn't leave that night, I never would. I packed a small bag, just enough to get by, and when the village was silent, I slipped out. The stars above seemed brighter that night, like they were watching over me. I walked through the dirt roads, the weight of my decision heavy on my shoulders. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. The journey wasn't easy. I hitchhiked when I could, walked for miles, and avoided anyone who might recognize me. I traveled with only the hope of finding a place where I could be free. Free from the promises made on my behalf, free from the traditions that bound me, and free from the pain that had defined my childhood. Days later, I arrived in the city. It was bustling, loud, and nothing like the village I had left. I found refuge with an NGO that helped girls like me, girls who had fled forced marriages, FGM, and lives they didn't choose. I was scared, but for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never known before: hope. Life in the city wasn't easy, but it was mine. I worked odd jobs, cleaning houses, selling food, anything I could find to survive. I saved every penny I earned, determined to create a new future for myself. I enrolled in school and worked harder than I ever had before. I wanted to learn to grow, to prove to myself that I could do it. Years passed, and little by little, I rose from the ashes of the life I had left behind. I started a business, became financially independent, and began building the life I had only ever dreamed of. But even as I reached new heights, I couldn't forget where I had come from. I couldn't forget the girls still trapped in the life I had escaped. That's when I knew my journey wasn't over. I had been given a second chance, but what about the girls who hadn't? What about the ones who couldn't escape? I couldn't stay silent, not when so many voices were still unheard. I became an advocate against female genital mutilation, FGM, traveling to conferences, giving speeches, and sharing my story with anyone who would listen. I told them about the girl I used to be, the girl who had been promised, who had been mutilated, who had been silenced. But I also told them about the woman I had become, the woman who refused to let the chains of tradition bind her any longer. The biggest challenge came when I returned to my village. I hadn't seen my family in years, and I wasn't sure how they would react. Some were happy to see me, proud of what I had accomplished. Others saw me as a traitor, a girl who had turned her back on her roots. But I knew why I had come back. I stood before the women in the village and told them my story. I could see the fear in their eyes, the same fear I had felt all those years ago. And when I spoke about the pain of FGM, about the trauma it caused, I saw something else: recognition. They understood. I didn't expect to change everything in a day, but I had planted a seed. One by one, women began to speak out. They questioned the traditions they had once accepted without hesitation, and that was enough for me. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with a conversation, and I had started one. 3 lessons from my story. Courage to choose your own path. It takes immense bravery to break away from the life that others have chosen for you. I left behind everything I knew to create a future I wanted, and that decision changed my life forever. Healing from trauma. The pain I endured as a child could have defined me, but I chose to rise above it. Trauma doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of your strength. The power of advocacy. Escaping wasn't enough for me. I had to return and fight for those who couldn't. Speaking out can create change, even in the most deeply rooted traditions. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have had the courage to leave everything behind and build a new life? Or would you have stayed and accepted your fate? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue the conversation about breaking harmful traditions and empowering women to take control of their own futures. Please support the channel now by subscribing to bring more awareness to more things that are taboos.